my intrepid students this fine week seven, Friday morning. It's week 7 already. So we don't really do traditional midterms or anything in this class, but if you're a student athlete or something like that, I'll probably have a midterm grade for you because the athletic department demands things like that. Everyone else, you should be able to keep track of your grades pretty well on Blackboard, I would think. Yeah, so we don't have to spend super long on these documents today. We should discuss them though, because they are a part of the essay that's due today, if you've not turned it in. And so I think clarifying a couple points, especially on Tocqueville. Tocqueville's he's not a good writer. I think that might be helpful, hopefully for some people. So a little bit of background to this first document. Alexis de Tocqueville is a French dude, and he's older. He's a little bit younger, I should say, than the generation of like Lafayette and a few other people who helped fight in the American Revolution. He was around for the French Revolution, but he was quite a bit younger than your average, soldier or someone who participated in that. So Tocqueville takes a tour of America. I had to read this book in college for my history degree. It's called Democracy in America, and Tocqueville just tours America. And he, as a French person, he points out a bunch of things that he finds unique about the United States, or especially noteworthy. He ends up having this huge love affair with the United States, mostly the idea of America, not actually what it is, but like the idea of it. He gets a lot of stuff wrong. In this particular segment of the book that you read for today, he points out the importance of political affiliations. And he makes some fundamental distinctions between what he sees in the United States and what he sees in France and Europe in general. And we haven't really talked about the United States a whole lot in this class. So it's kind of interesting we get a Frenchman's perspective of the US and what freedom looks like from the perspective of other Westerners. So that's a little bit of context. And if you've read the questions, the discussion questions, you'll know that political association simply means any kind of gathering of people for political purposes. So a political party, or an activist meeting, or like whatever you want to do in America, you can do it because it's a constitutional right to meet with other people and figure out your politics. It's not so in France, as we saw with if you were in on the call for Tuesday, the George Washington banquet that helps kick off the Revolution of 1848. Like that is not okay. That's not okay in France because it's a political association and you're not supposed to do that. So anyway, all right, I'm done. So what is, if anyone knows the answer to this, I would love to hear it. What are some of the benefits that Tocqueville points out that Americans have the right to politically associate? What are some of the benefits of that? What are some good things that come from that?
How they can use the press to talk about politics.
Yeah, good, Catherine. Thank you. Yeah, the press is extremely important to the civic life of a nation, and the media, we call it the media today because it involves lots of different things, but by having a free press who are able to hone in on the current events of the day and able to talk about things clearly and without fear of censorship, this is an extremely good thing, and Tocqueville points this out. Yeah, good. So being able to form political newspapers, or even just a free press, like a local press or a regional press who's able to report on stuff that's happening, the Chicago Tribune or the New York Times, are extremely important organs of civic life in the United States. And France doesn't really have anything like that. And if they do, it's controlled by the king. So, like, what good is it? Yeah. What other benefits have you seen of political association?
You're free to publish writings for political ideologies, stuff like that. The ability to spread political affiliations is drastically widened compared to like a France.
Yeah. So this kind of piggybacks with the point Catherine made, and it's like, there's this idea in the Enlightenment that if we just let anyone be able to speak freely and share ideas, because that's what the Enlightenment was this great sharing of ideas. Like if you just allow that kind of free marketplace of ideas, the good ideas will rise to the top, and the bad ideas will be proven out because people are able to argue against them and speak against them and stuff. And so there's this idea that if we just let everyone associate freely, make whatever arguments they want, by the nature of reason, and this is maybe a too optimistic idea, the good ideas will kind of separate, from the bad ideas, kind of like molasses, the good stuff rises to the top. So yeah, there's this idea that, if no wonder Europe is so backwards. No wonder we can't, keep a revolution together for more than 5 seconds. We don't have the freedom to talk about this stuff and write about this stuff. But in America, and from Tocqueville's perspective, the United States seems to be doing pretty well over there across the ocean. And he points to this idea of being able to say and write whatever you want. Like there's this great churning of ideas that's happening across the Atlantic, and that's a good thing. I think you guys basically have it here. The European, we don't have to spend super long on this one because Tocqueville only gets into so much. But freedom of the press is huge. Being able to associate and form political parties. Again, we can argue for our ideas, our platforms as political parties or political activist groups. And if there's a great forum of different ideas, then people are free to choose the best ones. And that's all good in a republic. What kinds of things does he have to say about the European model of associations or the limits therein? What does he have anything particular he points out about that? Like, how do they do things in Europe? It's been a couple weeks since I've read it. I need to find it. I'm having trouble finding it. He points out a couple of things about in Europe and France in particular. Let me turn my light on. Can't see. You can't see the pages. Okay. Yeah. So on the towards the bottom of page 744, the last full paragraph, he says, the means which the associations of Europe employ are in accordance with the end which they propose to obtain, as the principal aim of these bodies is to act and not to debate, to fight rather than persuade. They are naturally led to adopt a form of organization which differs from the ordinary customs of civil bodies, which they assume as the habits and maxims of military life. They centralize the direction of the resources as much as possible, and they entrust the power of the whole party to a very small number of leaders. What do you think this means here? Like, is it like a democratic, popular kind of associations like model that they have in Europe, or is it more like an elite-driven thing?
Is he trying to say that in Europe these revolutions fail because there's so many people trying to like grip onto power or something? That's kind of what I thought, but just compared to like America, where you had like the founding fathers and stuff like that, you can't really point to at least a honest group of people that did that in Europe.
I think that's partly right. Yeah. By the point he's writing, we haven't had the 1848 revolutions yet, and so the French Revolution really is the only one that's big and sticks. We've had the Decemberist revolt, and we've had a couple others, but they don't really do much. So he might be trying to say, like, look, in Europe, people are more prone to take up arms against their political enemies than to like debate these ideas in public. So in the U.S., at this point, we haven't had the American Civil War yet either. But Tocqueville, he's kind of looking at America through these like very rosy glasses, and he's like, in America they talk about their differences, and they have this open forum of free speech and freedom of the press, and the good ideas will separate from the bad ideas, and people they're naturally more prone to talk through political problems and find compromise. Whereas in Europe, if you have a political crisis, the tradition for hundreds of years has been to go to war to fix it. And so he looks at Europe as more of like a militant civil society, whereas Americans are more prone, they're more enlightened, is kind of what he's saying. And he says it throughout the other parts of the book too. Americans are more enlightened because they talk through their problems. Europeans bash each other's skulls in, which might be a little unfair. And the issue of slavery in the United States certainly causes a lot of violence, like even at the time that Tocqueville's writing. So he's overlooking a few things, but he's trying to just draw a comparison of like how different parts of Western civilization operate. And in the end, he ends up saying, you know what, we should be more like the United States, which is a pretty big deal. Because, I mean, at this point, the United States doesn't really matter a whole lot. Like it really does. It's not a very powerful country. It's broke all the time. It's constantly expanding. But if it went to war with like a European, like a real war with a European country, we get our asses kicked. And the only reason we didn't go down in flames in the War of 1812 with Britain was because Britain was fighting Napoleon at the same time.
Boo, leftist, boo, Marxist.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I can't help it. So we did. Yeah, they did set fire to the White House, though. They did kick our ass, I guess, a little bit. War of 1812. But anyway, the United States becomes a greater power. But Tocqueville's kind of the first to hone in on some of this stuff and be like, you know what? Maybe the Americans have some good ideas. Maybe the Americans are kind of following through with Enlightenment ideas, freedom of speech, political associations, blah 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 blah, that Europeans still haven't caught up to because of their traditions. Their kings are getting in the way, that kind of thing.
Now, that kind of reminds me of this funny story, though, I heard. Apparently, like, later on, like, it was one of the later presidents, is when America was much more powerful than Britain, that one of the American presidents actually showed the British Prime Minister the remaining burn marks on the White House from when it was first burnt down.
Yeah.
The original foundations.
Yeah, I don't know who that was. But yeah, I mean, in the early 1800s, America just did not have much going for it in comparison to Europe. But, and I know Nick is going to report me to the Ministry of Truth, for being a wild leftist.
I've been recording all of these.
Yeah. It's people like Tocqueville that start to look at America as exceptional, like it's Europeans weirdly enough, that look to the United States and they're like, oh my gosh, they got some stuff figured out. Aside from the whole slavery thing and voter suppression and the other problems we have, a lot of Europeans are looking fondly across the Atlantic and be like, oh, you know what? They've got some stuff figured out. But yeah, in terms of like raw power, though, the United States is nowhere close to Europe at this point. So, all right. So we talked about the press. I think it's worth mentioning that the American press compares with the press in France, and insofar as, in the United States, you can basically say whatever you want as long as it doesn't harm other people. But you can't, and you can like make fun of the government. At this point, Andrew Jackson is the president of the United States, and there's all kinds of political cartoons written making fun of Andrew Jackson. You can't do that in monarchical France, for instance.
I love those old-fashioned cartoons.
Yeah, there's a lot, and they're pretty funny. I bet. All right. My son is in the office right now. So, does anyone have any other questions or things you want to talk about on Tocqueville before we move on? Cool. As it relates to the essay assignment for this week, Tocqueville, like, it asks you to identify problems that Westerners are identifying in the modern era. Tocqueville, I think, is simply pointing out that, like, in parts of the West, we don't have freedom of speech. We don't have freedom of association. And he looks to America as the solution or the model to that. Like, let's do what the Americans are doing, because they seem to have a more robust, healthy, less violent civil society. So there you go. All right. This brings us to Fichte. I got to switch pages here. Page 779. I overshot it and went to page 799. Numbers are hard. Johann Gottlieb Fichte is a German. And at this point, Germany is not a united nation yet. It's not a united country yet, I should say. There's like several dozen independent small countries in the region of Germany. But there's a German language that they all share. There's perhaps a shared German culture of like German, what are they, Lederhosen and beer drinking, sausage making, I don't know. Like no matter where you are in Germany, you have like a shared culture with other Germans, but they don't call themselves Germans really. Like, you're Prussian, or you're a Saxon, or you're a Bavarian, or you're like whatever, you're a Berliner, or like, like everyone has their own separate identities, and no one's really thinking of themselves as German. So Fichte is a nationalist. He's someone who identifies a nation lying somewhere in Germany. We just have to identify it and make it a reality. So how does Fichte define the nation? What does that mean? Or what components go into having a nation?
Is this like the German Confederation?
No, no, we're not quite there yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's writing during the time of Napoleon. Napoleon just came through and kicked everyone's butts in Germany. Like Napoleon conquered large parts of Germany, and he didn't annex them into like the French Empire. Instead, what he did is he set up kind of a fake Holy Roman Empire. Like, it was called the Confederation of the Rhine, where it was like a puppet state that Napoleon could control from France. So Fichte is like, he's living under French oppression, basically. And yes, there are independent countries within Germany, but none of them are working together. None of them are doing anything to establish their own sovereignty. They're just sitting there being conquered by Napoleon. So what is he trying to say that they should do? Like what? I don't know. What's Germany? You know, what should we do in this situation? Is basically what he's asking.
Does he want them all to like come together and try to defend against Napoleon?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he's basically telling everyone to wake up, like join together. Like, what are you guys doing? So he kind of, you know, introduces this stuff. In the addresses, which I conclude today, I've spoken aloud to you first of all. I've had in view the whole German nation, you know, so he acknowledges there's such a thing as a German nation, which is kind of dangerous to say at that time. You know, everyone's speaking German here. You can all understand me. He kind of goes on to say, I want to gather to them from over the whole of our common soil, men of similar sentiments and resolutions, and to link them together so that at this central point, a single, continuous, and unceasing flame of patriotic disposition may be kindled. Which will spread over the whole soil of the fatherland to its utmost boundaries. So what is this? Yeah, what does this suggest? A patriotic flame, a fatherland, you know? I mean, do any of these terms sound familiar to you as like Americans or something?
Yeah. This sentiment really aged like fine wine in the grand scheme of history. I mean, uniting the fatherland and all that sounds very reminiscent of a certain mustachioed fella.
Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds very nationalistic, very like us against the world kind of.
Yeah, it is a very us against the world thing. Next week's documents will have another German writer. And at the time, like, so Germany becomes a united country, and they start thinking like, you know what? Everyone else in the world has an empire. Maybe Germany should have an empire too, because otherwise we're gonna die out as like our own. Like we got to keep up with the Joneses, basically. You know, like Germany has to be. You know, what's that? Like, what's the Russian? Or it's like the Poland meme. You know, Poland is strong. Or whatever. It's like Germany needs to be strong too, and it's us against the world. Like the world's not going to take pity on poor Germany if we don't keep up with the rest of the world, in forming our own country and forming our own empire and making our own battleships and stuff.
I love how like Prussia is like feels like it's so superior, because I remember I was watching this video. It's from and I think you probably should watch him. It's called The Armchair Historian. He was just sharing about like how the European powers felt about the American Civil War.
Yeah.
He was just saying when they brought over some viewers, German viewers, to watch the Civil War, all they could say was just about their superiority.
Sorry, I missed the last part of that, John.
All the Germans would think about is just how they're much more superior.
Yeah, and it's kind of an inferiority complex at this point, like at the point we're writing, and really all the way up through not the Civil War, the World Wars. Like Germany has this inferiority complex about it because they're so late to the game in forming their own nation, their own country. They're building up an empire. Sorry. That yeah, they have this kind of superiority complex, but it's rooted in all these historical like anxieties of like, you know, we need to form the German nation or we're all gonna die. We're gonna get conquered by France like every year, just like Napoleon, you know. So yeah, you're not wrong about that. So who's included in the German nation? What kinds of things go into this? Is it basically just anybody living in the region of Germany who speaks German?
Does it apply to anyone in Europe that speaks German?
Yeah.
Like any group at all that he like from like I know there's groups in Austria and like Czechoslovakia that speak German. Is he talking about all of them too?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's this pan-German, like it's basically like a anyone who adheres to our German culture and speaks the German language is part of the nation. And it doesn't really matter where you live. If you're under the thrall of the Austrian Empire, well, damn it, you're still a German, you know. Or Poland, if you're living in like East Prussia and Poland came and like conquered a piece of your territory, like it doesn't matter, you still belong to this German nation and you should be unified with it. Now that's an idea that is appealing to a lot of people. It's like, yeah, I want to be with like-minded people. I want to be with my people. But later on, in the next century after this, that Fichte is writing, this idea is really dangerous because it's like, well, there's 1 million Germans living in Czechoslovakia, so we better rescue them by invading Czechoslovakia and stealing some of their territory. And it's kind of a slippery slope into unify the nation by way of arms. And we've talked a little bit about nationalism in its most dangerous form. So yeah, basically anyone, to all you Germans, whatever position you may occupy in society, he says on page 780, below the 3 stars, whatever position you occupy, like it doesn't, you don't have to be included in this German nation. You don't have to be a landowner. You don't have to be a nobleman. Compare this with like the old kings of France, where like Louis XIV is famous for saying, "I am France," like I am France as king. The Fichte is like, no, like anyone who's German is part of the German nation. Strength in numbers and all that. So what do the German forefathers want current Germans to do? What is this idea of like, the Germans who have gone on before us? What do they want us to do right now in this current moment? And this dates back to like Roman times,
Would it be just to like put aside their like differences? Basically, he has a very like peachy way of looking at it, that they would be like, oh, look at the state of our German brothers, like they need to come together.
Yeah, it's some really powerful stuff. He look, your forefathers have been fighting for this nation, whether they knew it or not. They've been fighting for the chance for us in the present to unify and put us, like you say, Nick, put aside our differences, who with their own bodies stemmed the onrush of Roman world dominion, who with their blood won the independence of these mountains, because Germany was like the last place in Europe that Rome conquered, and they didn't even conquer most of Germany. They stopped at like the Rhine River and the Black Forest. Like the Romans never conquered Germania like they did France and Spain. And so like Fichte is kind of pointing to this, be like, you know what, history shows us that Germans are awesome. And here we go with the, superiority complex. Your ancestors spilled their own blood to, keep Germany instead of a part of Rome. And then at the top of page 780 in the second column, if our race dies out, meaning the German people, if our race dies out with you, our honor will be turned to shame and our wisdom to foolishness. And so like, look, we're sitting here under Napoleon's domination. We're under the thrall of France. What are we doing here? We need to put aside our differences and unite and, become a strong German nation, just like our forefathers wanted us to, just like they fought for in Roman times, So, yeah, Fichte, if we're putting this in the context of the essay assignment, Fichte is saying that there's a problem insofar as Germans don't really know that they're Germans yet. They're Prussians, they're Saxons, they're Bavarians, they're whatever, but they need to recognize themselves as Germans. Because if they all came together and joined together as one nation, they would be really strong. And guess what? When they finally do end up doing this in 1871, Germany becomes, like overnight, Germany becomes one of the strongest countries in the world. So he's kind of foreshadowing a lot here. What about, okay, one more question. The relationship of Fichte's nationalism to humanity. Like, how does he kind of tie in this idea of the German nation to aspirations that all humankind have? Oh my gosh. So let me give you a clue. 781, towards the bottom of the first column. So, if there's truth in what there has, I guess it's like halfway down. If there's truth in what has been expounded in these addresses, then are you of all modern peoples the one in whom the seeds of human perfection most unmistakably lies, and to whom the lead in its development is committed? If you perish in your essential nature, then there perishes together with you every hope of the whole human race for salvation from the depths of miseries. What's he trying to say here about Germany?
They're the master race. In a very brown, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say this guy would have really loved to see 1933 Germany. He probably would have wept tears of joy.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically that we're all dummies, the rest of the world, and they need the guidance of the German people to guide them, not make sure the world collapses.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the dark side of nationalism, right? Like there's the idea of like, we all need to unify as one people so we can become stronger. Okay, fine. Like every nation, every culture group believes that. But where it gets really dangerous is when you start saying, oh, we're a city on a hill, man. We are humanity's best shot at approaching perfection. Our destiny as a nation is to lead the human race, is to become the greatest. And anyone, with the implication that anyone who tries to get in our way of that goal, whatever that looks like, needs to be tossed aside.
Well, I would actually say that the main turning point where I think nationalism is like evil is when it gets to the point where it involves either the conquering or the destruction of other nations.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now, if it was like for the protection of your nation, you know what I mean? Like if it was actually in danger, it was hurting you.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think then you maybe, then maybe war would be justified. But if it was just for like, for a stupid reason, or you just, it was for conquering, then no, that's when nationalism, takes a dark turn.
Yeah, absolutely. The German people need living space, Lebensraum. So therefore we need to conquer all of Eastern Europe so we can, there's already people living there, man. What do you think? What do you think is happening? We need more living space for the German people. This is Hitler's big thing in the 30s and 40s. with the implication that Ukrainians, Poles, Russians, they're all lesser forms of humanity. They don't deserve this land, but Germany does.
And here's
See-
the thing.
Yeah.
If they wanted living space, they chose Russia. A cold, muddy, just awful place to live. Yeah, that would be the last choice I would do for living space.
Yeah, there's problems with that. So yeah, I mean, you guys are right. I mean, you guys you're spot on. The seeds of not only it's like planting two seeds in the ground here. Fichte is doing. There's the seeds of German nationalism, which okay, coming together as a country, as a nation, well, great. But the other darker part of that is that, you know, it's Germans' destiny to lead the human race. And that's where things get a little tricky. Now, people were probably reading this in a slightly different context in the early 1800s. Fichte is trying to instill a sense of patriotism in Germans. But this transforms over the course of the next century or so into this idea of German racial superiority, like, you know, we're the master race. Like John's mentioning, like we deserve what other countries have. We deserve that because we're the best. That's the dark side of nationalism. When you start taking things away from other people and claiming it as your birthright, that's where it gets bad. So we're talking about racial superiority in any sense. That's always bad. So any other things you want to talk about here, or any questions you have about the paper? Oh, excuse me. Before we go. I think you guys have a pretty good handle on this. So for the essay, you know, you basically, if you haven't written it already, you know, there's the 4 documents, there's the 2 from this week and 2 from last week. Just talk about some modern problems that they identify and what their ideas of solutions are. Obviously, in this context, Fichte is saying, you know, Germany is not a nation, it needs to become a nation. Nationalism is the answer to the modern problem of, you know, feeling like you have no identity. So, all right. Well, thanks, guys. This is good. I appreciate you all very much. Let me know if you have any questions about anything. And if not, I guess I'll see you next week. See ya.